In the constellation of American sports legends, few stars have shone as brightly, or as distinctly, as Shannon Sharpe. Known first as a trailblazing tight end for the Denver Broncos and Baltimore Ravens, Sharpe carved out an indelible legacy on the gridiron. His Hall of Fame resume includes 3 Super Bowl rings, over 10,000 receiving yards, and a reputation for being one of the most physically gifted and vocally confident players of his era. But long after he left the locker room, Sharpe didn't fade into retirement. He transformed, seemingly effortlessly, into one of the most magnetic and influential voices in modern sports media. From NFL analyst to cultural commentator, from meme icon to podcast powerhouse, Sharpe rode the evolving media wave with uncanny intuition. Whether trading hot takes with Skip Bayless on FS1's Undisputed, holding court on Club Shay Shay, or going viral for his expressive reactions on First Take, Sharpe represented a new hybrid of athlete-entertainer-commentator. His presence felt like a necessary recalibration in a sports media landscape often dominated by cold statistics and sterile debates. Sharpe brought emotion. He brought humor. He brought realness. And yet, in 2025, at what many considered the height of his post-football career, it all came crashing down. In the spring of that year, Sharpe found himself at the center of a high-profile civil lawsuit that would ultimately lead to his abrupt departure from ESPN, fracture his public image, and raise profound questions about accountability in the media age. The legal accusations, serious, graphic, and hotly contested, sparked a rapid sequence of events. From a voluntary leave of absence to a confidential settlement and eventual contract termination, the story evolved swiftly, amplified by social media and intensified by the very platforms that once celebrated him. What followed wasn't just a fall from grace, it was a dismantling of a persona that had become synonymous with authenticity and relatability. Sharpe was no stranger to controversy, but this time, the stakes weren't about bold sports opinions or heated on-air spats. They were about personal conduct, consent, and the blurred line between public persona and private life. This editorial aims to unpack the complex arc of Shannon Sharpe's journey. From celebrated athlete to revered media figure, and now, to a man at a crossroads. It's a story not just about one man, but about a culture that builds up icons with fervor and, when scandal strikes, tears them down with equal force. It's about how networks like ESPN navigate the thin line between business and morality, and it's about whether redemption is possible in a time when public trust is as fleeting as a trending hashtag. Shannon Sharpe's rise wasn't accidental, his fall wasn't instantaneous, and his future remains uncertain. But by exploring every chapter of this story, from lawsuit to settlement, from firing to fallout, we can begin to understand what his case says about sports, celebrity, and the shifting ethical compass of American media. The moment the civil lawsuit against Shannon Sharpe was filed in April 2025, it was clear this was not going to be a mere headline that faded with the news cycle. The suit alleged deeply disturbing behavior, describing a 2-year relationship between Sharpe and the plaintiff, identified in court documents as Jane Doe, that culminated in accusations of sexual assault, coercion, and repeated violations of consent. According to the plaintiff, the incidents included rape on 2 separate occasions, the use of physical intimidation, and the unauthorized recording of intimate acts. For Sharpe, who had carefully cultivated an image as a no-nonsense, principle-driven media figure, the allegations landed like a seismic shock. Within hours of the suit becoming public, the sports world reacted with a mix of disbelief, suspicion, and concern. Fans, colleagues, and detractors alike scoured the court filings, seeking clarity or ammunition. Was this a targeted attack against a high-profile black media personality? Or was it the exposure of a hidden pattern of abuse from someone who had long flown too close to the spotlight? Sharpe's legal team swiftly issued a denial, calling the claims categorically false and disruptive. But the statement did little to quell the swelling media storm. In an age where civil litigation, especially those involving public figures, often plays out In the court of public opinion as much as in legal chambers, silence can be deafening. And in Sharpe's case, his decision to temporarily step away from his duties at ESPN only intensified speculation. Though initially framed as a leave to attend to personal family matters, it was widely interpreted as a strategic retreat to avoid becoming a distraction during ongoing legal proceedings. It's worth noting that civil cases like this do not require proof beyond a reasonable doubt, as in criminal trials. Instead, plaintiffs must only meet the preponderance of the evidence standard, convincing a judge or jury that the alleged behavior more likely occurred than not. For Sharpe, even if no criminal charges were filed, the mere existence of such a detailed and disturbing civil complaint was enough to ignite scrutiny, not only of his behavior, but of ESPN's role in continuing to employ him. Over the following weeks, fragments of the case trickled into the public domain. Court watchers analyzed timelines, past statements, and social media posts. Legal analysts debated whether Sharpe would push for dismissal, settle quietly, or allow the matter to reach a courtroom. Meanwhile, supporters pointed to his decades of public service, philanthropy, and mentorship, arguing that the allegations were out of character and possibly opportunistic. Others, particularly advocates for survivors, insisted that such allegations must be treated with seriousness and dignity, regardless of the accused's fame or prior reputation. But the lawsuit wasn't the only thing on trial. ESPN itself began facing pressure. The network, owned by Disney, had already been under fire in recent years for its handling of past controversies involving on-air talent. In Sharpe's case, it wasn't just about whether he was innocent or guilty. It was about whether the company was willing to keep him on air while he stood accused of deeply personal, serious misconduct. Corporate America has, in recent years, adopted a more cautious approach to reputational risk. The #MeToo movement irrevocably altered how sexual misconduct allegations are handled in public-facing industries, from Hollywood and politics to sports and media. High-profile figures like Matt Lauer, Les Moonves, and Deshaun Watson had already shown the varying ways such cases can unfold, often depending as much on PR management as legal outcomes. Sharpe's case now entered that same complex arena. For ESPN, the decision to stand by Sharpe, at least temporarily, was a gamble. It reflected both his unique value to the network's ratings and the company's hesitancy to act too swiftly in the absence of concrete legal conclusions. But it also suggested a familiar playbook: buy time, assess the temperature, and prepare for either damage control or quiet separation. Within 3 months, the situation would escalate. A confidential settlement was reached in July 2025. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, indicating that the plaintiff could not refile the claims. Though no admission of guilt was made, and no further details were released, the court's finality did not come with moral clarity. For some, the dismissal was a sign of resolution. For others, it looked like a high-profile individual using wealth to avoid further scrutiny. Regardless of intent or innocence, one thing became certain: Shannon Sharpe's relationship with ESPN, and with the public, had fundamentally changed. The lawsuit didn't just allege misconduct. It catalyzed a re-evaluation of who Shannon Sharpe was, and what responsibilities media platforms have in amplifying or cutting off the voices of their stars. When the lawsuit against Shannon Sharpe became public in April 2025, ESPN moved quickly but cautiously. Within 48 hours, the network announced that Sharpe would be taking a temporary leave of absence from First Take, citing the need for him to focus on personal family matters. At first glance, the language seemed innocuous, respectful even, but to those who followed the rhythms of corporate crisis communication, it was immediately clear this was damage control. ESPN's carefully worded statement avoided any direct mention of the lawsuit, the allegations, or even Sharpe's name beyond the leave announcement itself. In doing so, the network bought itself time time to monitor the unfolding legal case, assess internal risk, and manage public reaction without appearing to rush to judgment. It was a strategy forged in the media industry's long history of navigating scandal, where maintaining plausible deniability and sidestepping direct comment can be more important than immediate accountability. Sharpe, for his part, played along. On social media and in brief podcast appearances, he confirmed the leave, framed it as personal and temporary, and offered no insight into the legal case beyond calling the claims false and disruptive. At one point, he even signaled an intent to return before the 2025 NFL season kicked off, an optimistic if perhaps overly ambitious projection. But as the weeks dragged on, the gap between ESPN's public silence and the gravity of the allegations grew more conspicuous. For a network that thrives on dissecting controversy, from the NFL's handling of player misconduct to debates over athlete activism, its restraint regarding one of its most high-profile commentators felt deafening. Behind the scenes, insiders speculated that the voluntary leave narrative was more a mutual pause than an outright choice. According to unnamed sources cited in industry coverage, Sharpe had been advised by legal counsel and management to avoid on-air appearances while the lawsuit remained active. ESPN, concerned about the optics of having someone accused of sexual assault front and center on one of its flagship programs, likely encouraged the same. The result was a sort of forced sabbatical, neither a suspension nor a firing, but something that functioned as both. To many observers, this move mirrored how other companies have handled similarly volatile situations. Rather than act swiftly with a definitive stance, corporations often choose the neutral zone, a temporary removal, under the guise of respect for due process, with an exit strategy prepared if public pressure intensifies. It's a middle path that allows executives to appear prudent without alienating talent or audiences too quickly. However, that approach is not without criticism. Skeptics argue that it reflects a form of cowardice, that corporations like ESPN benefit from their stars when they bring ratings and relevance, but retreat behind vague language when controversy strikes. In Sharpe's case, the network leaned on his persona for months to drive traffic, build segments around his charisma, and elevate First Take's appeal to younger, digitally engaged audiences. Yet when real accountability was called for, ESPN's default was ambiguity. In the absence of definitive action, others filled the silence. Media outlets began questioning ESPN's inaction. Social media amplified every update from the lawsuit, often tagging the network's official accounts in posts demanding transparency. Advocacy groups started pressuring Disney, ESPN's parent company, to issue a clearer stance on workplace ethics and platforming public figures under legal scrutiny. By early summer, it became increasingly difficult for ESPN to maintain the fiction of a simple personal leave. Though the legal case had yet to resolve, the weight of reputational risk began tipping the balance. Internally, producers began experimenting with show formats that excluded Sharpe, while externally, advertisers started asking questions, none of them eager to see their brands linked to a potential scandal. When the lawsuit was finally settled in July, ESPN had a decision to make. With no legal verdict, but with public pressure mounting and the court of opinion leaning heavily against neutrality, the network confirmed what had long seemed inevitable: Shannon Sharpe would not be returning to First Take, and his contract would not be renewed. The language of the announcement was once again sanitized, no mention of the lawsuit, no acknowledgement of the real reasons, but the message was clear. The voluntary leave had become a quiet termination, a star had fallen, a brand had protected itself. This incident marks yet another chapter in the delicate, and often hypocritical, dance between corporate media and scandal. ESPN's handling of the situation reflected the broader challenges of modern media ethics, where the desire to support talent must be weighed against the realities of public accountability, brand safety, and social responsibility. It was also a reminder that, in the absence of transparency, narratives will be written for by the public, by the press, and by the increasingly unforgiving glare of the internet. For Sharpe, the leave became a limbo. For ESPN, it became an escape hatch. And for viewers, it became yet another case study in how media giants choose risk management over moral clarity. On July 18, 2025, just over 3 months after the civil lawsuit against Shannon Sharpe was filed, the case was quietly closed. The legal terminology was straightforward. The case had been dismissed with prejudice, following a confidential settlement between the plaintiff, Jane Doe, and Sharpe's legal team. That phrase, "with prejudice," meant the lawsuit could not be refiled, that it was legally final. But for the public and for ESPN, it raised more questions than it answered. There was no trial. No depositions were made public. No formal findings of fact or admission of guilt were recorded. In a legal sense, Sharpe remained unconvicted of any wrongdoing. But as is often the case in civil litigation involving powerful public figures, the courtroom was never the true battleground. The stakes had always been reputational, and in that arena, the verdict was far murkier. Confidential settlements are often a tool of pragmatism. They offer plaintiffs compensation without enduring the trauma of a prolonged legal battle. They offer defendants, especially those in the public eye, the ability to avoid protracted scrutiny, media attention, and potentially career-ending revelations. In this case, the settlement came amid reports that Sharpe had initially offered $10 million to resolve the dispute out of court, a sum that hinted at the seriousness of the accusations and the urgency with which his team sought resolution. To critics, the decision to settle was telling. Why, they asked, would a man so adamant in his innocence agree to a settlement, especially one that required the case to be dismissed with prejudice, permanently closing the door on further proceedings? Was this justice delayed, denied, or simply sidestepped? To supporters, however, the settlement was viewed through a different lens, as a strategic decision to move forward, spare his family further public humiliation, and avoid a circus-like trial that could taint his legacy whether he won or lost. But whatever the motivation behind the settlement, its consequences were swift. ESPN, which had thus far danced delicately around the issue, moved to sever ties. In the final week of July 2025, the network confirmed that Sharpe would not return to First Take and that his contract would not be renewed. There was no farewell segment, no final broadcast, just a line in a press release, buried between updates on the upcoming NFL season and programming changes. The ambiguity of ESPN's language sparked new debate. Was Shannon Sharpe fired? Or was his contract simply allowed to expire, conveniently timed to coincide with a lawsuit's closure? From a legal perspective, it was a distinction with little consequence. But in the court of public opinion, those details mattered. Being let go implies wrongdoing. Not renewed suggests business as usual. By opting for the latter phrasing, ESPN effectively tried to have it both ways, distance itself from the controversy without overtly acknowledging the shadow under which it was doing so. This maneuver wasn't unique to ESPN. It followed a familiar playbook used by corporations and media institutions alike. When a star becomes a liability, let the contract expire quietly, hope the public forgets, and move on. But in doing so, ESPN dodged accountability of its own. The network never acknowledged its role in promoting Sharpe at the height of his popularity, even as the alleged misconduct may have been unfolding. Nor did it publicly confront the ethics of keeping him on air while litigation was active. In choosing silence, ESPN avoided potential litigation, PR fallout, and advertiser discomfort, but also missed an opportunity to lead. Meanwhile, Sharpe's response was relatively subdued. He did not fight the termination publicly. He did not call out ESPN for what some might interpret as abandonment. Instead, he pivoted, appearing on his own Nightcap podcast and acknowledging that while the situation had been painful, he was at peace with the outcome. He lamented only that the scandal had overshadowed his brother Sterling Sharpe's long-awaited induction into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, an emotional blow that seemed to cut deeper than his own professional setback. That moment of introspection revealed something human beneath the high-stakes media narrative. For all his bravado on screen, Sharpe, in that moment, sounded weary. Not defiant, not triumphant, just tired. Perhaps he knew that even without criminal charges, even without a court loss, the damage had been done. His firing, or non-renewal, wasn't just a contract matter. It was a symbolic severing. ESPN, the largest sports media platform in the world, had decided he was no longer an asset. What remains unclear, and perhaps unanswerable, is whether this resolution served justice. The legal system closed the case, the network protected its image, and the public, depending on where they stood, either moved on or demanded more. But as with many high-profile cases that end in settlement, closure did not mean clarity. In the end, the question isn't just whether Shannon Sharpe deserved to lose his job. It's whether the process by which that decision was made, and the legal mechanism that led there, offers any kind of model for accountability in the future. Or whether it was simply another case of crisis management triumphing over truth. The departure of Shannon Sharpe from ESPN sent ripples far beyond the boardrooms and legal offices. For fans of First Take, the shock was palpable. Sharpe wasn't just a co-host. He was a vital energy source for the show. His passionate delivery, quick wit, and unfiltered takes created a dynamic that distinguished the program in an overcrowded sports talk landscape. Without him, the chemistry on the set felt fundamentally altered. Immediately following Sharpe's exit, First Take experienced a noticeable shift. Ratings dipped as some viewers drifted away, their connection to the show tied as much to Sharpe's personality as to the sports content itself. The producers scrambled to fill the void, rotating guest analysts and attempting to boost the presence of Stephen A. Smith, whose towering presence had often been Sharpe's foil. But even Smith's star power struggled to maintain the same level of engagement. Viewers quickly voiced their opinions on social media platforms, with hashtags mourning Sharpe's absence trending regularly in the weeks after his departure. Fans described him as the heart of the show, lamenting that his unique blend of insight and charisma was irreplaceable. Memes circulated both nostalgically and critically, a testament to how deeply Sharpe's voice had permeated modern sports culture. Some even speculated whether ESPN's decision would cause lasting damage to the network's flagship morning program. Yet behind the scenes, ESPN appeared resolute. The network doubled down on a broader strategy to diversify its commentary panel and reduce reliance on any one personality. New voices were brought in, aiming to bring fresh perspectives and appeal to a wider audience. The shift aligned with the larger trend in sports media, moving away from star-driven formats toward ensemble casts to hedge against reputational risks tied to individual talent. Stephen A. Smith, who had long been Sharpe's on-air partner and occasional sparring partner, found himself in an unenviable position. Known for his impassioned delivery and commanding presence, Smith attempted to steer the show into new territory while maintaining its identity. In interviews after Sharpe's exit, Smith expressed sympathy for his colleague, but refrained from discussing the details publicly, highlighting the professional tightrope walked by those remaining on the show. The void left by Sharpe also affected the broader sports media ecosystem. His signature phraseology, distinctive expressions, and memorable takes had sparked a wave of online engagement, fueling memes, viral clips, and spirited debates. The sports world had become accustomed to his voice serving as a barometer for everything from NFL controversies to pop culture moments. Without him, that particular cultural thread unraveled. At the same time, the circumstances of his departure gave rise to broader discussions about how networks handle crises involving talent. Could ESPN have salvaged Sharpe's role with different management? Did firing him alienate a loyal fan base? Or was the network simply making a necessary choice to protect its brand in a volatile media environment? The answer is complex. On one hand, Sharpe's firing represented the increasing corporate risk aversion permeating sports media. On the other, it exposed the limitations of celebrity-driven programming when off-air conduct comes under scrutiny. In an era when social justice movements and accountability narratives dominate public discourse, networks are caught between keeping talent and maintaining integrity. For the viewers and fans, the loss of Shannon Sharpe from ESPN's airwaves was more than a contractual change, it was a cultural moment. It raised questions about loyalty, forgiveness, and the price of fame. It highlighted the fragility of personas built in the public eye, where a single lawsuit could erase years of goodwill. As First Take and ESPN moved forward, the industry watched closely. The Sharpe saga became a case study in how much influence a single voice can wield, and how easily that influence can be severed. While Shannon Sharpe's career and public persona dominated headlines, the impact of his legal troubles and departure from ESPN rippled deeply within his family, especially for his older brother, Sterling Sharpe. A formidable NFL talent in his own right, Sterling's legacy was already well established before Shannon's rise in sports media. Yet, the scandal surrounding Shannon cast an unexpected shadow over Sterling's moment of recognition. In 2025, his long-awaited induction into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. For Sterling Sharpe, the timing could not have been worse. Celebrated for his dazzling career as a wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, Sterling had earned respect not only for his athletic achievements but also for his humility and dedication to the game. The Hall of Fame induction is a career pinnacle, a public celebration of a lifetime of excellence. But in the glare of Shannon's controversy, that moment was muted, overshadowed by the swirling media storm around his brother. Family members and close associates reported that Sterling felt the weight of the situation intensely. In private conversations, he expressed frustration that his personal accomplishments were being eclipsed by Shannon's scandal, despite having no involvement in the lawsuit or its details. The public conflation of the Sharpe name created a complex emotional landscape, where pride in one brother's success was entangled with pain over another's downfall. Media coverage rarely differentiated between the two, often using the Sharpe name interchangeably, further complicating Sterling's efforts to enjoy his moment of triumph without being pulled into controversy. Interviews that should have celebrated Sterling's career instead veered toward questions about Shannon, underscoring how the fallout transcended individual accountability to affect an entire family. This dynamic highlights a broader, often overlooked aspect of public scandal: the collateral damage borne by loved ones. While public figures are held accountable for their actions, their families frequently endure unintended consequences, facing public judgment, media intrusion, and personal anguish. For Sterling, the Hall of Fame induction, which should have been a highlight of his legacy, became bittersweet, tainted by circumstances beyond his control. The emotional cost extended beyond the immediate family. Shannon Sharpe himself acknowledged in his Nightcap podcast the pain caused to Sterling and their family, a rare moment of vulnerability that revealed the human toll behind headlines. He described feelings of isolation and regret, reflecting on how quickly public adulation can turn into public scrutiny. This intersection of personal and public tragedy raises important questions about the ethics of media coverage and public discourse. How can the industry balance the need for transparency and accountability with sensitivity to those indirectly affected? How might public figures and their families be supported amid scandal without excusing wrongdoing? The Sharpe family's experience serves as a poignant reminder that behind every headline is a web of relationships deeply impacted by public controversies. Sterling's overshadowed induction and the emotional cost borne by the Sharpe family are chapters of the story, often eclipsed by sensationalism but essential for understanding the full human dimension of the crisis. The Shannon Sharpe saga, from the explosive allegations to his quiet exit from ESPN, forces us to confront larger questions about accountability, redemption, and the role media institutions play in shaping public narratives. It is a story not only about one man's fall from grace, but also about how the sports media ecosystem responds when its stars become embroiled in controversy. At its core, this case illuminates the tension between celebrity culture and ethical responsibility. Sports media thrives on larger-than-life personalities who can command attention, generate buzz, and create loyal audiences. Shannon Sharpe was one such personality, charismatic, outspoken, and relatable. His voice carried weight because it felt authentic and unfiltered, making him a magnetic presence in a crowded field. Yet, as the Sharpe case demonstrates, charisma alone cannot insulate a figure from the consequences of alleged misconduct. The initial reluctance of ESPN to act decisively, followed by their eventual termination of Sharpe's contract, illustrates the difficult balancing act networks face, weighing commercial interests against moral imperatives. This dilemma is hardly unique to ESPN or Sharpe. Across industries, from entertainment to politics to sports, we have seen similar patterns, institutions slowly distancing themselves from stars accused of wrongdoing, often after public pressure mounts. The pace and nature of these responses reveal much about contemporary corporate culture, one that is deeply risk-averse, but also keenly aware of public sentiment in a hyper-connected world. Moreover, the Sharpe case underscores the limitations of legal outcomes in resolving public perception. The confidential settlement closed the legal chapter, but it did little to resolve the court of public opinion, which often operates on a different set of values: trust, credibility, and moral judgment. In this sense, media figures live in a dual reality. They are subject to legal standards but also to a harsher, more unforgiving public scrutiny. The path to redemption then becomes fraught and complex. Can a public figure like Sharpe rebuild a career and reputation after such allegations? What does accountability look like beyond legal settlements? Is there room for forgiveness, or does the digital age's memory render second chances impossible? Some argue that true accountability requires transparency, sincere contrition, and meaningful change, both personal and systemic. Others caution against a culture that too readily condemns, without due process or possibility for rehabilitation. Navigating this terrain requires nuance, empathy, and a commitment to justice that extends beyond soundbites and headlines. For media organizations, Sharpe's case offers lessons about proactive ethics and crisis management. Waiting until allegations become public can compound damage. Integrating clear policies around conduct, swift investigations, and transparent communication is essential. It also calls for a culture that prioritizes respect and safety, rather than merely damage control. Finally, Sharpe's firing and the conversations it sparked reveal society is evolving standards around power, privilege, and responsibility. In an era defined by movements like Me Too and increased attention to systemic inequities, the expectation for accountability is higher than ever. Public figures are not only entertainers or analysts, they are also representatives of values that audiences demand be upheld. As sports media continues to evolve, the lessons of the Sharpe case will resonate. It reminds us that the price of fame is accountability, and that true redemption, if possible, must be earned through more than silence or settlements. It requires courage, honesty, and a commitment to change. The firing of Shannon Sharpe from ESPN is more than just a headline in the world of sports media. It is a mirror reflecting the complexities, contradictions, and challenges facing modern celebrity, corporate responsibility, and public discourse. From his rise as a compelling and beloved sports commentator to his abrupt departure amid serious allegations, Sharpe's story encapsulates a broader cultural moment where fame is no longer an unassailable shield against scrutiny. As this editorial has explored, ESPN's handling of the situation revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of a media giant navigating crisis. The network's initial reluctance, the carefully crafted voluntary leave narrative, and the eventual termination of Sharpe His contract demonstrate a calculated approach aimed at balancing brand protection with the presumption of innocence. Yet this approach also exposed the limitations of silence and ambiguity. In an age where audiences demand transparency and accountability, Sharpe's settlement and quiet exit left unresolved questions about justice, about the costs borne by families like the Sharpes, and about what accountability truly means for public figures who straddle the line between celebrity and influence. The emotional toll on his brother Sterling Sharpe's Hall of Fame induction underscored how personal and professional lives intertwine in ways that media coverage often overlooks. More broadly, this saga challenges the sports media industry and society at large to rethink how allegations of misconduct are handled, legally, ethically, and culturally. It highlights the urgent need for clear policies, proactive ethics, and a commitment to justice that goes beyond public relations strategies. It also prompts reflection on the possibilities and limits of redemption in a digital age defined by rapid judgment and relentless scrutiny. Looking ahead, the Sharpe case will likely serve as a cautionary tale and a reference point for how media companies manage crises involving talent. It signals a growing intolerance for ambiguity and a demand for accountability that transcends legal outcomes. For commentators, athletes, and public figures, it underscores that influence comes with responsibility, and that personal conduct can have profound professional consequences. For ESPN and other networks, the future will require balancing the cultivation of compelling personalities with the imperative to uphold integrity and trust. Audiences increasingly expect media to not only entertain, but to exemplify values aligned with broader social progress. Failure to meet these expectations risks eroding credibility and alienating viewers. In the end, the Shannon Sharpe episode is a reminder that the line between public triumph and public fall can be thin, and that navigating it requires more than talent. It demands transparency, accountability, and a willingness to confront difficult truths. Only then can media institutions foster environments where both voices and values can thrive. As the sports world moves forward, Sharpe's story will remain a powerful example of the high stakes of fame and the evolving standards of accountability in our cultural moment.